And the owl does not seem to be working.
Oh, it's because you haven't switched over to the camera. Oh.
But I don't need that. Hi, we're just getting a couple things worked out and then we're ready. I can just do it if no one's here in person, so I can just do this.
Yeah.
But I don't understand why I can't see anything on this screen.
Hold on. And you're not hearing anyone either. Take you off the meeting owl.
Yeah, I think the owl is. Now, can I hear people? Oh, this one. Okay, someone say something?
Something.
Something.
Hello.
It was not working.
You didn't hear?
Hello.
See me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, now you can see me. Okay, and
To
this.
see you.
Yeah, so we need to change view to gallery.
We see and we hear.
There you go.
Okay, we're here. How's everyone? You're fine.
Fabulous.
You're fabulous. It's been a long time since I've done a class with everybody on Zoom with like the PowerPoint and everything. So I kind of forgot how it works. But I think we got it now. I think we're good. I have this whole thing set up, but nobody came in person.
It's too cold.
It's too cold. It's so cold here. It's what, 55? Is it 60 yet?
It's too cold.
Too cold. Well, it is good to see everybody who is here. I encourage you, if you are here with us and you're able to put your cameras on so that we can feel like we're actually sitting here in space, sharing space together. Bye, Josh. Thank you for helping. We got some more people that were logging in. Yeah, so I'm just sitting in the conference room by myself. It feels great. It's delightful. So we
Is this going to be every week on Tuesday now?
So I'm in charge of January, so I can speak to January. So for the month of January, Tuesdays at noon, we are doing this. And then Cantor, I believe, is doing February, but I think he's going to do an evening, not a daytime.
Okay, I could get there from the gym.
You
if
could get
don't
there.
mind, if you want company.
I am happy to be in person. Although, you know what, I think they're going to be meeting today to talk about all the protocols and everything, given the surge of Omicron. So I can't say for certain what things are going to look like after this week, but we'll keep you posted. All right. So we ready to jump in?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
do you know if there's a way to see everybody's face?
Are you, let me see.
I'm on a computer, but my big screen is 50 of the last 100. And then,
Okay. So I just stopped the share. Did you have?
oh, okay, now I got it.
All right, but in a second, I'm going to share it again. But what you're going to want to look for, hold on, let me get this going. I've got two computers going at one time. Do you have, do you see anybody? Do you see any people?
I see a few people on the right-hand side of the screen, 2, 4, 6.
Okay, so go to gallery view. So up at the top where you see a couple people, there's a little grid. Do you see the grid?
Maybe. Show grid video.
Yeah, click that. And then at the bottom corner, there's like a little kind of triangle in the corner, and you can pull that over to see more people.
Look at that.
That work?
You're so smart.
It's been a while, but I'm remembering how this all works. All right, good. Well, those of you who are not, who are just listening, that's good. But I'd love to see you if you're able to. So so I know who's here and I can include everybody. But in the meantime, let's jump in. All right, I'm going to make you smaller on this side so I can focus on this thing. So before we jump into talking about the women rabbi types, kind of the prototypes of women rabbis that we're going to be talking about, just to kind of set the stage, establish the scene. We are talking about this now because in the context of our centennial year, we are looking at 100 years, well, really 101 of Congregation Beth Israel. And within the existence of, within the time, hi, Nancy.
I couldn't figure it out. Now I
You
did.
got it though. I was like, which Nancy is it? It's this Nancy. It's a good Nancy.
Oh,
Within the context of the last 100 years, for 50% of that time, there have been women rabbis that exist in America. However, so in our celebration of the centennial, part of what we look at is also what's happening in the world. And this is one of the important things that happened in the Jewish world throughout the existence of Congregation Beth Israel. I believe your first woman rabbi, was it the one who's in San Francisco now? Was she your first woman on the pulpit?
yes.
Jamie Spall?
No, you're talking.
I'm talking about Jessica Zimmerman. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Right. So you've had her, you've had me, you had Erica Birch in the religious school. So of the many, many rabbis who have played a role at Congregation Beth Israel, women have only been a few of them. And what we're going to look at today, starting with today and over the next 4 weeks, is how has the role of the woman rabbi evolved over history in America, overseas, abroad. And I'm going to take us actually all the way to the end of my little slide here thing today, because I like to start with what we're looking at. So today we're talking about the women rabbis of the 16th through 19th centuries, and we're going to determine what that is and who they were and decide for ourselves whether or not we're going to count them as rabbis. We have to determine what that is. Next week, January 11th, we're going to talk about Rabbi Regina Jonas. Has anybody ever heard of Regina Jonas before?
No.
All right, well, we're going to hear more about her next week, but she's the first woman to ever be officially ordained. Now, most of us grew up thinking that the first woman to ever be officially ordained was Rabbi Sally Preisand.
Right.
She was the first woman to ever be officially ordained in America, and we're going to learn about the distinction of that next week. But Rabbi Preisand is joining us. She will be here with us on Zoom, and we're going to turn the hour over to Rabbi Preisand and hear her story. So I really hope a lot of people will join us for that, because she's a special person, and it's really incredible to get to hear directly from her. So yay for Rabbi Sally. Then January 25th, I'm going to present my thesis to you. I have to go back and read it because it's been a while since I wrote my rabbinic thesis. But essentially, I wrote a thesis on the way that women have changed the rabbinate. Oh, I thought someone was calling me. They're not calling me. Someone's calling one of you. So that's what we're going to go through today. But let's start first and foremost. We're going to go right back to the beginning where we were and think to ourselves about the people we've known, the people that we've met who have been pioneers, the people that we can think about who we've known as trailblazers, as pioneers, as kind of firsts in their field, whether it's a professional field or just maybe it's a volunteer field, maybe it's a family field. It doesn't have to be a profession, but take a minute and think about who in your life was a leader in a field in a way that others were not. Something that was different about them, something that they did differently that made them what you would consider to be a pioneer. Take a minute and think about it, and just start by putting in the chat who the person is that you're thinking of.
I can't make my chat go on. How do I do that?
Do you see a little box at the bottom, like a little dialogue box that says chat?
Yeah, I wrote in my answer.
And then hit return.
Oh, hello. Doesn't work.
No? Hi, Sam. How are ya?
Okay, I'm looking to get the picture back.
See, we're all rusty on Zoom. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not working.
So if you type your message, you see your message, and
Yeah,
then you hit return and nothing happens.
nope.
Well, then you'll get to share.
Oh,
out.
wait, maybe. Did
Oh
somebody see
yeah,
my
Sarah
thing?
Blum.
It's there.
Okay, got it.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. All right, wonderful. Looks like we've got a couple people here who've added their Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All right, so just to go through, we've got Sandra Day O'Connor, Helen Keller, and her teacher Anne Sullivan. Carol, I had a like a kid's biography of Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan. That was my favorite book when I was probably 10 years old, and it's like still so vivid in my mind. Dr. Elizabeth Scott, professor of statistics at UC Berkeley and chair of the department. Golda Meir, another vote for Sandra Day O'Connor. Another vote for Golda Meir. Valentina Karaskova, Soviet cosmonaut. Sarah Blum and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I would love to hear, this is a nice list. I like this list from maybe 3 people. If I'm hearing myself from someone's computer.
You left out Ruth Westheimer.
Nobody
put that down.
I didn't see that. I'm not seeing that one, but we'll count that too. If maybe 3-ish people would like to share a little bit about the person that you chose and what were the personal characteristics, external assets, or unusual circumstances, what led this person to be the pioneer that they were? What was unique or special or gave them the chutzpah to go forward in their field? All right, Sam, go ahead.
Okay, Golda Meir, Milwaukee school teacher, became enamored of Zionism, was able to raise mucho dinero for the Zionist movement, moved to Israel or Palestine, and eventually became a prime minister. Also was in charge during 1973, helped during the so-called development of the atomic weapons for Israel. And during the 73 Yom Kippur War, she was the leader of the country.
So what do you think about Golda Meir? What gave her the chutzpah to be the first woman to take on a position like this that made her different from anybody else who might have had, some fundraising experience and a teaching background?
She was willing and able to do it.
She was willing and able. All right, so maybe that's one ingredient that it takes to be a pioneer, is being willing to take the brunt of it. Okay. Okay, good. All right, does someone want to share the person that they chose and what kind of made them exceptional in their field? Carol, go ahead.
Well, and of course, Helen Keller was born deaf and blind, and she was considered basically an animal. She had no way of communication. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear, but she had something in her that made her rise above that. And her family, they had some material wealth, and they hired a teacher for her, Anne Sullivan, who took Helen to totally new, a new level, that she became she understood everything that was taught to her. She could read, she could write, she could do different languages. She actually, in later years, became, of course, a big advocate for those who were blind and deafblind. She was into women's rights. She traveled around the world as a deafblind woman, sharing her story with others. She was a true pioneer to show that disabled people can overcome any type of challenge that they have. And she was totally amazing.
Mm. So something that we see that's kind of in common here is that there was some either material wealth or ability to access material wealth, right? That there had to be a level of comfort in order to take a step towards this kind of incredible feat. And the other thing that Helen Keller had was a mentor and a cheerleader and a person who was her advocate and support. So there has to be a system of support in order to take this leap. It's very hard to be a pioneer in this way without a system of people who are lifting you up. Natalie, go ahead.
I want to go back to Golda Meir, if you don't mind, because I don't think that fits her at all. I think she was a woman of drive, and she wasn't afraid to be the only woman in a room at a time when women weren't acceptable in a room. And talk the talk and walk the walk of the male population.
I think this is another important ingredient. I'm glad you said this. The passion and the drive has to be kind of unlimited, right?
Yeah.
All right, Janie, and then we're going to go on.
Well, this is sort of going on. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. My woman is Sarah Blum, who was Aunt Sarah to many, many, many young girls. Sarah started a girls' camp in the Adirondacks. And from day one, she empowered all of us. And I think that was her greatest strength in the world, was empowerment of other women. On the first day, she had 164 campers. And we all thought she knew all of our names, because as we would walk into the dining room in the morning, she would kiss our forehead to make sure we didn't have a fever, and say good morning to us. And while she was doing that, she would pull the back of our t-shirt out, because we had a name tape in the back of our t-shirt. And that's how she knew everybody's name on the first day. But her final sermon at services, the final Saturday morning at camp, every year, and I was there for 12 years, was the little engine that could, because her message constantly was, I think I can, I think I can, I knew I could. And she gave I'm 78 years old. I was a camper a long time ago, and some of my best friends are still from that camp, because we have joined in forces knowing that we as women knew we could. And that was her gift to the female.
Beautiful. So there's a couple pieces in there that you mentioned, some of which are connected to what others have said, like a passion and a drive for a particular cause. And some of which was a different, which is this raising up of other people, and the way that she made you and so many other campers feel is what made her a pioneer and a leader for you.
Right.
Beautiful. All right. Any other, before we go forward, any other really important qualities or characteristics that we need to make sure we mention? Sam, go ahead. Take yourself off mute.
Willing to give up everything else for the cause,
Really being so single-minded.
family, etc.
Mhm.
What about this woman who was a chef? I mean, after all we eat, she had a big influence on us. I can't remember her name. I saw her.
Julia Childs.
Julia Childs. She had a big influence on everybody's life.
Beautiful. So sometimes it's also having a particular talent or passion or skill that other people simply don't have, being the best person for the job. All right, so let's pause on that as we think about what a rabbi is, because we're not talking about just any pioneer, but whoops, what did I just do? I took off the screen share. Okay, that's okay. Took off the screen share. Now I'm going to go back to it. Okay, so what is a rabbi? What does a rabbi need to be? What skills does a rabbi need to have?
Compassion.
listening,
Understanding.
ability to share, to speak, to share any information.
Good.
A knowledge of Judaism and a belief.
Leadership abilities.
Okay, what else?
A good teacher.
Good. Anything else?
You know what, with everything that's said, you can become a rabbi without a lot of those things.
I think
yes, you can.
I've known rabbis who did not match up to that, male or female.
a role model.
So Sam, what did those people have that made them a rabbi?
Good degree. You know, just like I've known teachers who should not have been teachers, but they had the degree.
So I think that this is important, right? Because I think we know a lot of people who have a lot of these. Sorry, spelling.
A good rabbi has to be a good student also. An ongoing student, I should say.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we might know a lot of people who have a lot of these qualities, but don't have this, right? Or we know a lot of people, maybe hopefully not too many, but we might know people who have this, but not any of this, or some combination thereof. So as we are looking at these women who came well before they had this, none of them were able to get the right degree. None of them had the right degree, perhaps weren't even interested or never even considered having the right degree. But perhaps some of these qualities they did have, or maybe many of these qualities they did have. How do we assess whether or not they fall into the category of first rabbi, of first proto-rabbi? Does it matter? So that's what we're going to take a look at today with all of these. A good performer, singer, speaker. Speak, share, maybe sing.
Or not.
Or not sing, or just not be afraid to do it anyway. Good. All right. So, I mean, there's many things that we could add to this list, I think. But I think what's important that we mention here is kind of the tension between having the right degree and having the right tools. Okay, so what we're going to do is, because I thought we were going to have people in person, we're going to do it a little bit differently. But what I think what we'll do is we'll break into some breakout groups, and I'm going to give you some links to look at. So at least one person in the group needs to be able to pull up the link. We have some people here who are able to look at a link and be on Zoom simultaneously. We'll make sure we've got at least one of each in each group. Okay, and we're going to look at 3 different women and assess what they had that was what made them a pioneer, what personal characteristics did they have that made them considered by history to be someone who falls into this category, and what did they have here that made them a rabbi. And then we'll take a look and just start to understand what the first women who filled rabbinic roles looked like. And who they were. So just a brief overview, the 3 women that we're going to look at today. Osnat Barzanai, who was a ta'anit, which means a teacher. She was the Rosh Yeshiva. She was the head of a yeshiva in Kurdistan in the 1600s. So one small group is going to take a look at Osnat Barzanai and learn a bit about her and teach about her to the rest of us. We are going to study also Hana Rachel, the Maid of Ludmir. There's not much that's known about her. She's sort of a Yentl character in some ways, maybe someone that a character like Yentl would have been based on, but a kind of a Hasidic master and teacher and leader. And she has also become an LGBTQ icon in very recent days, that people are assigning a lot of modern characteristics to her and thinking about her in that way. And then Ray Frank, who's the most recent. Has anyone heard of Ray Frank? She's so cool. You're going to love her. She was called the Girl Rabbi of the Golden West. And here, I've got a few more little tidbits. So Osnat Barzanai, 16th and 17th century Kurdistan. She was the daughter of Rabbi Shmuel ben Netanel Harlevi of Kurdistan. And he trained his daughter to be a scholar. And when her husband died, she took on leadership of the yeshiva. So she, daughter of a rabbi, married a rabbi. And then when her husband died, instead of giving leadership over to one of the other men in the yeshiva, she took on the leadership of the yeshiva. Hana Rachel, she wore men's clothing and taught to both men and women. People considered her a tzaddik. And as we said, oops, I missed a letter here. Modern LGBTQ plus icon. And then Ray Frank, born in San Francisco, the first woman to ever preach formally from a pulpit in America, swore she didn't want to be a rabbi, studied at Hebrew Union College, but also had some contradictory views. Like, for example, did not believe that women should work outside the home and sought anonymity after she got married. When she got married, she didn't want to do the preaching thing anymore. She got out of that game, didn't believe it was appropriate for a married woman. So let's see, do we feel like we have the tech savvy to break up into these groups and look at some links, or should we do it all together? All together. Okay. So is someone talking to me? No? Okay. All right. So what we are taking a look at here then, so I apologize because the plan was to be able to read a little bit more. But we're going to start with Osnat. I stopped sharing, right? Now I need to do it again. Okay. Okay. We got that? All right, good. So we gave, let's take a look here. Does someone want to read this poem or this letter that she wrote?
Oh, you mean the part about I never left the entrance? Okay. I never left the entrance to my house or went outside. I was like a princess of Israel. I grew up on the laps of scholars, anchored to my father of blessed memory. I was never taught any work but sacred study to uphold, as it is said, and you should recite it day and night. You should recite it day and night.
Beautiful. Here, why don't you read a little bit more about her leadership in the yeshiva over here?
And he, my father, made my partner swear never to allow me to engage in work, and thus he did as he was commanded. From the start, the rabbi, Mizrahi, was involved in his studies and did not have time to teach the students, so I would teach them in his stead, a helpmate. Thus we learned that Rabbi Mizrahi agreed to conditions whereby Osnat would never have to spend her time on housework because she was a Torah scholar like himself. After her father died, her husband technically became the head of the yeshiva, but in fact, it was Osnat who taught the students who had come for rabbinic training.
Great. So then when he dies, the leadership of the yeshiva naturally passed his widow. I love how they just kind of mentioned that it was such a natural transition when it also must have been just kind of, it was earth shattering. No woman had ever been the head of a yeshiva before. However, since she had already been their teacher, the transition was natural and painless, as it said.
Rabbi,
Yes.
was she accepted by others?
So I think we can't really know. I think, what we do know is that, she's not quoted like other rabbis of the time. She's not referred to as other rabbis of the time. We don't know if other people chose other yeshivas because they couldn't possibly go to the one that was run by a woman. I don't know specifically how many other yeshivas there were in Kurdistan at the time. That I don't know. It says here that no mention of opposition to her leadership is recorded. She was clearly important to the Kurdish Jews, and I almost said Kurdish. I don't know what I said, in her lifetime. But we don't know anything about her influence on the lives of other people. We don't even know what her daughters thought. However, this is so fascinating. And another piece that we'll have to find the time to get into is the new impulse, the new transition of women in the Orthodox community beginning to learn and calling themselves rabbis. So she's kind of used as a prototype of an Orthodox woman who could be a teacher and a rabbi. So she's kind of the first that falls into that category.
But they would never have called her to the Torah.
Right.
So this is so interesting, right? So what we don't know that she ever did, or we have no record of, if we go back to our list of what a rabbi needs to do or needs to know, we don't have a record of her as a prayer leader. We don't have a record of her as a pastor. We don't have a record of her being
Shliach Tzibur.
a shaliach tzibur, a prayer leader in any kind of way, or if she kept to those mitzvot, right? We don't know if she prayed 3 times a day. It doesn't say anything to assume that she might have.
She didn't have to.
She didn't have to, right? Explain that for us, Sam. Why not?
Women don't have to do anything that has anything to do with time.
Right.
So if she's a halachic Jew, if she's a law-abiding Jew, then the law exempts her from needing to pray 3 times a day to fulfill the commandment of that kind of prayer.
She wouldn't even have said Kaddish.
Yeah. So based on the way that the mitzvot are written, based on the way that those laws are understood, can a woman fulfill the job of a rabbi in the way that we've defined it?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
How were there a lot of, forgive me, I don't know, were there a lot of rabbis in Kurdistan that there wouldn't have been opposition to her running a yeshiva? I have no idea what the history of, I know that the Kurds are close to Israelis and they're friends of the US and they're supposed to be, they're enemies of Afghanis, but I don't know, or Iraqis, but I don't know anything about what they were back then, which is maybe why she was so accepted. There was nobody else. They all had to work. They were farmers. They were, I don't know, growing opium. I don't know what they did back then. So,
I have to admit, Carol, I don't know either. We'd have to, in order to learn, to understand more about the background of Osnat Barzilai, we'd have to do a little more studying on the background of the Kurds, which I don't know. There's a new book coming out about her called Osnat and Her Dove. It's a children's book, but I have to get my hands on it. But it is interesting, and part of part of the materials that I had here for you. Let me see if I still have it pulled up. All right, hold on. Let me pull this one up for you. Once I remember how to Zoom again. Come on, little computer. So, I gotta get to the beginning of it. The forgotten story of the first female rabbi is finally being told. The book is by Sigal Samuel about this Osnat and Her Dove, a new illustrated children's book about the first female rabbi in history. So they are not hesitating to use the title. Born in Kurdistan in 1590, so this part we've already learned, considered to be a scholar. The information about her is scarce, though there are some letters and manuscripts. What I thought was poignant about this is that she, the writer of this article, was talking about herself being of Mizrahi heritage and realizing that even in the story of women rabbis as it's told now, she doesn't see herself represented, and she hadn't until she came across Osnat Barzilai. So good questions that you're asking. Yes.
Well, rabbi, as I learned it, rabbi means teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So this woman was a teacher. Maybe they didn't have HUC back then. Maybe there was no way to get a degree. And by mere fact that she knew what she knew, and she was a teacher and a scholar, she in fact was a rabbi.
Beautiful. So you're absolutely right about that. There was no central seminary. There was no sort of accepted place of institutionalized study. Instead, what you have were these yeshivas, right? You have rabbis ordaining other rabbis. Does anyone know what the ritual of ordination is? How someone's ordained?
Smicha,
How do you get smicha?
by passing a whole bunch of tests,
There's an action.
placing of hands.
It's a kiss on the kepi. So the person who is ordaining you puts, like Sam said, puts their hands on you and often gives you a kiss on the forehead. So Rabbi David Ellenson gave me a kiss on the kepi, and that's how I became a rabbi after, all the study and the tests and all that other stuff. So Janie, I think that you're absolutely right to point this out, that if the central place of study and learning is the yeshiva, and she grew up learning in a yeshiva and teaching in a yeshiva and eventually running a yeshiva, but no one ever thought to give a woman a kiss on a kepi and make her a rabbi. That perhaps she had all of the ingredients, but it was just so far out of the bounds of Jewish life at the time to ever even consider what it would have meant to call this woman a rabbi at the time.
But her husband and her father might have kissed her on the kepi.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah, but maybe not with the intention.
Sometimes it's also inherited, like in the Hasidic, from father to son.
So whether or not we consider her the first rabbi or not, I think that it's interesting to think about the role that she played, what, someone with this kind of qualification and all those things that we talked about, passion and drive and resources and influence, all of those ingredients to being a pioneer. If she fits that qualification, then perhaps we can call her the first woman to ever be ordained as a rabbi. Or not ordained, but the first to ever be. Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
Well, couldn't there have been other ones too that we just don't know about? That nothing was written about?
Isn't that so cool? But we do wish we knew, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to consider when we talk about firsts, right? Because before the first, there also has to be someone who paved the way for that first. And as we, when we meet Rabbi Preisand, one of the things that'll be interesting to hear from her and learn from her about is she thought she was the first woman to ever be ordained as a rabbi. Because we didn't know at the time about Regina Jonas. What we'll talk about next week, and just a little preview. Regina Jonas was ordained in Germany, and all of the record of her story was in East Germany. And so until the wall fell, there was no access to those records. No one knew that she existed.
Yeah.
And so she was ordained, the first woman to ever be ordained, until she found out there was someone before her. And she probably thought she was the first because she never heard of Osnat Barzillai. So there always has to be a first before the first. Let's take a look at the next one, the Maid of Ludamir. We thought we didn't know much about Osnat, but we actually know a little bit less about.
That's a terrible name, Osnat.
Sometimes it's spelled with an A, and that makes it a little better, I think. But we had a Hebrew teacher when I was studying named Osnat, and it was like, you don't even want to say it, but in Israel, it's a perfectly fine name. Okay, so this article from the Jerusalem Post gives us a little bit of context about Osnat asking the question, the Maid of Ludamir, a woman Rebbe? ? They're wondering. And it offers her story in the context of modern Orthodox ordination, just like we talked about with Osnat a few moments ago. She is an example of a woman who achieved great power and a great following. That's another ingredient that we need, right? And while not a Rebbe, making sure to rub that in there, fulfilled many of the Tzaddik's functions during her fascinating life. So she's born in Ukraine in 1805, the early stages of Hasidism. The charisma of the individual Rebbe had not yet been supplanted by the reality of Hasidic dynasties and the institutionalization of the Hasidic world. This young woman was known early on for her piety and for wearing the fringes of tzitzit. She studied diligently, mastering Midrash, Agadah, and the ethical works of Jewish tradition. She'd been promised a young man to marry earlier in her life, but rejected this match and retreated into a secluded life of meditation and the recitation of psalms. After undergoing a serious illness, she experienced a religious ecstasy that led her to don a talit and to don tefillin during her weekday prayers. She actually wore the talit and phylacteries all day. And after the death of her father, she recited the Kaddish prayer publicly in the synagogue, a practice unusual for women at the time, which is what Sam pointed out was one of those things that we're missing from Osnat's story, that we don't know anything about her leading prayer or even leading Kaddish. But Hana Rachel took these things that were typically only for men to do, and she did them. So her knowledge garnered her a following. One of the things that's unique about her here, it says for the third Sabbath meal before the end of Shabbat, she would deliver a shiur. So she would give a public teaching, that kind of public teaching that we talked about as being a rabbinic quality on mysticism and ethics, and her followers were both men and women. So her fame spread. She was dedicated to spirituality and ethics, but she remained unmarried. She eventually married, this is interesting, at the age of 40, which was very, very late. That's like old age, in the, whenever this was, not anymore, now that I'm 40, but continued to study. But the marriage ended in divorce because of her obsession with piety and her unique role and personality. We'll jump down here. Her charisma and piety are an inspiration as serve as a model for Jewish women and men today. Her story raises many questions about the role of Jewish women in the public domain and teachers of Torah to the Jewish masses. Her life remains a fascinating one, as she was ahead of her time. So the Maiden of Ludamir seems to take, I love that she's just the maid, right? Because she didn't marry until later. But she fills, I think, maybe even more of those functions that we typically think of as being rabbinic functions. And unlike Osnat, this was something that she came to from her own passion, not necessarily as a family dynasty. The other little thing that I dropped was that she now is considered, where did that? Hold on. Nope, undo this. Oh, what did I do? No, stop share. That she is understood today in LGBT circles as kind of an icon. So I wanted to show you a little bit of that.
So while you're looking for that,
yes, here we go.
How do men, I've never heard of a woman laying tefillin and wearing tzitzis.
So go ahead.
I guess how?
How do they do it?
No, I know how they do it, but how is that accepted? Or I don't know. I never heard of it before.
I don't think there's any prohibition.
Well, it's a woman dressed in men's clothing. That's what makes it a prohibition. Because tzitzit and talit and tefillin are considered to be men's garments. So a woman putting on those garments is considered to be a woman dressing in men's garments, which, if you take biblical Torah literally, is prohibited. However, there have been women in history. So Rashi was famous for many things. One of them teaching his daughters to wear tefillin. And so I think not unheard of, but definitely not accepted.
Well, women today wear talit.
Yes. Not in Orthodox circles, though. And there have been, in Israel, this is a big issue because women doing things that are traditionally reserved for men in Israel is a harder sell than it is here in America. So if you go to the conservative seminary, so here at the Reform at HUC, you don't see a ton of women wrapping tefillin, though you might see one or two, but you don't see a ton of men doing it either. So it's not really a part of typical Reform practice. If you go to the conservative seminary, you're going to see as many women wrapping tefillin as you see men wrapping tefillin. Then if you go to the Orthodox seminary, you're only going to see men doing it. What, Sam, you're nodding. What's the...
No, just, I knew where you were going with that. You're only going to see men doing it. What about in
You're not
Israel?
going to see women at all, right?
In Israel, you say it's a hard sell, but what about when these girls are carrying the AR-15s on their shoulders, you know?
Right, that's you'd think.
We're flying the jets, you know, that's,
Right.
you know, that's a men's part. That's
So
men's
there have
part.
been stories that I've heard about women in Israel. There was a famous situation where a rabbinical student, a female rabbinical student, had left school, and she had been praying at school, and she had wrapped tefillin and was out at a bus stop, and she was not wearing her tefillin, but the markings, because tefillin, you wrap it really tightly, and so you know when your pants are too tight and you get the red marks on your body, right? She had the red marks from the tefillin around her arm. And she was beat up at the bus stop because someone saw the red marks on her arm and knew that she had been wearing tefillin. So not accepted. Not accepted in traditional Jewish circles. Accepted in progressive Jewish circles, but not as commonly seen, simply because tefillin itself is not commonly seen in more progressive Jewish circles.
What about wearing talit? I grew up not wearing talit. It was conservative. And I have a beautiful talit that Rabbi Khan and Gail Bear gave me a few years back. It's still not a habit to wear it because I never grew up with it. And do women in Israel wear talit? I can't even picture.
No. In Israel, in a Reform Jewish setting or conservative Jewish setting, you will see women wearing a talit, and you know, like the shops on Ben Yehuda Street will sell feminine looking talitot, but those tend to be marketed to Americans.
I was told that after you become a bat mitzvah, then you can wear a talit, and that's when I started to wear one.
Yes.
But I was bat mitzvah conservative, which was a real rarity. I don't even remember what I did. It was such a small thing. And we didn't wear talit. No way. I'm lucky I was on a bima.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is definitely the prevalence of women in talitot has definitely changed over time. Now in a conservative synagogue, I think like you would see women wearing a talit like you would in a Reform synagogue.
I think in Orthodox, you don't wear a talit until after you're married.
Oh, really?
I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, of course, for a bar mitzvah, you're leading the service, so you wear a talit.
Yes. But so as confusing as it is for us, you know, as surprising as it is for us, we can only imagine what it would have been like in, you know, 1860. And where were we again? In Ludmir, Ukraine. That's where we were, right? So just a little bit of kind of what, in modern context, how Hana Rachel is understood, now kind of placing what we know today about different kinds of lifestyles and seeing Hana Rachel through that lens. She has become a queer icon, potentially transgender. This idea of a woman dressing in the clothing that's traditionally worn by men and feeling unfulfilled in a traditional marriage, that she has become an icon in this community.
Who makes her that? Who makes her that icon? I mean, she lived before any kind of that kind of discussion was going on. I mean, who makes her that way now?
Right. So there is a little bit of putting a modern context on a character that we don't know what she was thinking, and it does say down at the bottom of the article that she has no voice to clarify her identity, nor would she even understand the identities that we assign to her, lacking the century of context, which makes such conversation comprehensible. So ultimately, her legacy eludes the specifics. But just like we have the woman, the Mizrahi woman studying Torah who becomes representation for women of non-Ashkenazi descent. She can also, Hana Rachel can be representation for those who are interested in the rabbinate from a non-heteronormative descent, for a non-heteronormative identity as well.
I
So I
don't
think
buy that.
you don't have to,
I don't buy that.
but somebody else might, and that might be meaningful for them. So you don't have to, but others may. So thoughts, questions before we go on to Ray? Oh gosh, we're almost out of time. Of course, that's what happens. All right, I'm going to pull up.
What about a woman being admitted into the yeshiva to begin with?
Oh, we don't have that. We're not there yet.
Well, but these women were heads of yeshiva.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that part of it is that, so for those of us who heard Cantor Ostfeld, right, when she called and asked about an application to HUC, they kind of didn't know what to do. They're like, can we even do that? We've never done that before. Can we even do that? I think no one had really even thought to ask the question. And so I think that a lot of what we're seeing here is that people hadn't even stopped to think or stopped to ask the question of whether or not women could or should be doing this, because it was so outside the bounds of what was normal, so outside the bounds of what Judaism had always been.
But Rabbi,
yes.
how do you accept the fact that women in Israel are now in the army and in the Air Force, and they are saving the country of Israel, yet the ultra-Orthodox do not accept them in any role? Now, the women are saving the country for the Orthodox who do not serve in the army unless it's special occasion. How do you rectify that?
Well, I don't.
Some of the ultra-Orthodox don't believe in Israel as a state message.
That's right.
The Messianic state, so.
Listen, I think that, but we're not just talking about the ultra-Orthodox, right? We're talking about the modern Orthodox. And we're also talking about secular Jews who have never heard of a woman rabbi before because it's not a part of the cultural context. That Reform and conservative Judaism is an American construct, not an Israeli one. And so while you have HUC in Israel, it's an American institution, and they only ordain a very small handful of Reform rabbis, male and female, at Hebrew Union College in Israel, Israelis, every year. So it's still a very new kind of unusual phenomenon to be progressively Jewish and not traditionally Jewish in Israel. In Israel, you have, for the most part, you have two speeds. You have religious and you have not religious. This kind of spectrum of observance where you can be observant but not traditional is sort of unheard of. So when I was studying in Israel and I would walk around wearing a kippah, people would look at me like I was insane. Like, what are you doing? That's not a thing that we do here. Because this idea of egalitarian Judaism doesn't exist there in the way that it does here. Does that make sense? But we need women in the army. All right, so the last woman that we're going to take a look at today is Ray Frank. She is the first woman in America to be on record as serving in any kind of rabbinic capacity. So in 1890, she preached formally from a pulpit in the United States. She was called the Girl Rabbi of the Golden West. She became a sensation in the Jewish world. And essentially what happened is that she, there was a synagogue that was in a community that was divided because there were Orthodox Jews and there were Reform Jews, and there wasn't really a way to bring the community together. And so she ended up giving the sermon. So there wasn't going to be a sermon on Yom Kippur, and she ended up giving the sermon on Yom Kippur about the need for the Jewish community to come together. And kind of everybody was shaken that this woman had given this important message, that she had offered this new way of thinking about Judaism, and she became she became a name. She traveled around the West Coast, giving speeches and talking about Jewish topics, all kinds of Jewish topics. Sorry, this one goes, it's so long. Oh, here's the story. At the eve of the High Holy Days, she was shocked to find that despite the presence of many affluent Jews, the town had no synagogue because the Orthodox and Reform elements were so divided that they were unwilling to join for services. When Frank expressed her dismay, a prominent member of the community, knowing her by reputation, offered to arrange for Rosh Hashanah it was Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Kippur, if she would give a sermon. And so she agreed. And what's different about her story as well, so much more of it is documented because the media went crazy, whatever Jewish media there was in Spokane, Washington at the time. But there's all kinds of stuff on the record about Ray Frank. Newspaper articles that were written about her, names that were given to her, like the maiden in the temple and the the most talked about Jewess of today, dubbed the Maiden in the Temple by the Spokane paper and the Jewess in the Pulpit by the Cincinnati Israelite. She launched a new career. But I think that what's interesting is that with all of these people, we see all kinds of contradictions. So she enrolled in courses at Hebrew Union College, but always denied that she wanted to be a rabbi, because for Ray Frank, in the world that she was living in, she felt it was inappropriate for a married woman to have a profession, that once she was married, her plan was to be home. And so this is what happened. Eventually, she, here's her paradoxical positions. She was an opponent of what is commonly called women's rights. She spoke out against suffrage and asserted that women's influence on their male relatives already brought them a say in the political process, and they lacked the education and experience necessary to use the vote wisely. And so though she supported herself until she married and advocated careers for single women, she believed that married women should not work outside the home. And so eventually Ray Frank married and had to get out of the public eye. So they went to Europe, eventually came back and went to California, but too many people remembered her in California. So they ended up in Illinois, where she was able to live a life of anonymity, and to forgo that identity, that part of herself that she had established when she was a young woman. So there we have it. Yes, Nancy.
Do you think her name helped her to not be in the public eye? Because when you hear the name Ray, that doesn't sound like a woman's name.
I think it's interesting. I think part of what we'll talk about and part of what we'll hear from Sally, from Rabbi Preisand when we speak with her, is that many of the women who had to be successful at this time also had to be kind of androgynous. You know, people had to forget that they were women in order to make the kind of strides that they were making. So I wonder if that was part of the situation for Ray Frank, either in her presentation or maybe with her name. Once she did marry and she changed her name, and her last name changed. So though she's known in history as Ray Frank, the name that she had at the end of her life was like Litwin or something like that. But I think that's an important observation. And I think something we'll be able to ask Sally about.
What year was HUC founded? Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. I want to say 1850, but I have to double check. I think it's sometime in there.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions about, let's head back to this slide here about what makes a rabbi. We've now learned about these three women who filled these important functions, none of whom actually in their lifetime were called rabbi, except for maybe Ray Frank a little bit, but kind of in a tongue-in-cheek way. Would you consider them rabbis?
I had just a quick comment.
Sure.
We are still looking at all these women through our lenses today. We're still not looking at them like with Ray Frank, what it was at that time. You know, it was at that time appropriate to stay home after you got married. I mean, we are looking at this, or the one that they call Hana, the Maid of Ludamir. We're looking at her through today's vision. And we just can't forget that that life is different during these times, for all three of these people.
Mhm. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that there is something to be learned from by placing a modern lens on it. I mean, this is how we learn Torah, right? Is we take these ancient texts and we put a modern lens on it and we learn something from it. So I think that there's something to be learned from the experience of history and looking at it with a modern lens. But I think you're absolutely right that we can't forget that we don't know what it was like to be alive at that time. And so we can't judge it. We can learn from it, but we can't judge it. We can't say, my gosh, I can't believe Ray Frank wasn't in favor of women's right to vote, because we don't know what it felt like to be Ray Frank. We can't judge it, but we can notice and learn.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
As a play on words, ability to speak, share, sing publicly. I think to sing in harmony publicly would be an interesting phrase, because a rabbi has to be harmonious and blend harmoniously with society, congregation. And it just dawned on me that in harmony would be a neat thing to put in there.
I love that. Let's add it. All right, they are kicking me out of the room in a minute. Does anyone have any final thoughts? Nancy, go ahead.
This was very interesting. I'm glad you chose this topic, and I'm glad I was here.
I'm so glad you were too. So
And I
next,
think it worked better not in breakout sessions, because we could all contribute a lot more to each subject.
yeah, so that's good. I mean, I thought we were going to have people in person and on Zoom, so I was going to break you up that way, but since you're all here, this worked out that way. So next week, I'm very excited to introduce you to Rabbi Regina Jonas, who I didn't even know existed until I went to the Jewish Museum in Berlin, where I learned about her and was like, holy cow, how is it possible that this is, by the way, I was already a rabbinic student at this time. So a really fascinating story and a tragic story too. And we'll take a look at the first generation of women rabbis and some of what their challenges were and what they had to say. And this will all be in preparation for our conversation with Rabbi Preisand the week after that. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Great
Bye.
talk.
Thanks.